The storm hit so suddenly that Belinda Emerson barely had time to register the first crack of thunder before the sky opened up and turned the dusty Nebraska road into a river of mud beneath her mare's hooves. It was late September in 1882, and Belinda had been riding for 3 days straight from Cheyenne, carrying nothing but a leather satchel with her most precious possessions, and a heart full of determination to escape the life her uncle had planned for her. The arranged marriage to a cattle baron twice her age had been the final straw, and she had slipped away in the dead of night, taking only what she could carry. Now, drenched to the bone and shivering as the temperature dropped with alarming speed, she could barely make out the shapes of buildings through the sheets of rain. Her mare stumbled, exhausted and frightened by the lightning that split the sky with increasing frequency. Belinda squinted through the downpour and spotted a small ranch house set back from what passed for a road. Warm light glowed from a window, promising shelter from the merciless storm. She had no choice. Her mare was nearly spent, and hypothermia was setting in. She could feel her fingers going numb around the reins. With the last of her strength, she guided her horse toward the house, dismounting clumsily in the mud and nearly falling. Her legs felt like water beneath her as she staggered to the door and knocked, her knuckles barely making a sound against the wood over the roar of wind and rain. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warmth inside. He was broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that widened at the sight of her. Belinda tried to speak, to explain, but her teeth were chattering so violently she could not form words. She swayed on her feet, certain she was about to collapse right there on his porch. Without a word, the man stepped forward and caught her elbow, steadying her. He glanced past her at the exhausted mare standing with her head down in the rain, then back at Belinda's pale, shivering form. His jaw tightened with what looked like determination, and he guided her inside with a firm but gentle hand. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical force, making her skin prickle painfully as blood began to flow back into her extremities. "Wait here," he said, his voice deep and measured. He disappeared for a moment, returning with an armful of cloth. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. The bedroom is through that door. There are dry things on the bed. I will see to your horse." Belinda opened her mouth to thank him, but he was already pulling on a rain slicker and heading back out into the storm. She stood dripping on his floor for a moment, her mind foggy with cold and exhaustion, before she forced herself to move. The bedroom was small but tidy, with a quilt-covered bed and a simple dresser. On the bed lay a flannel shirt, wool trousers that would be far too large for her, and thick socks. She peeled off her soaked riding dress with clumsy fingers, her skin so cold it felt like wax. The dry clothes were warm and smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. She had to roll the trouser legs up several times and cinch them tight with her own belt, but they were blessedly dry and warm. When she emerged from the bedroom, still toweling her long dark hair, the man was back inside, dripping wet himself but moving with efficient purpose. He was stoking the fire in the stone hearth, adding logs until flames leapt high. A pot hung over the fire, and the smell of soup filled the small house. He glanced at her briefly, nodded as if satisfied that she was no longer in immediate danger, then disappeared into what she assumed was another bedroom. When he returned, he wore dry clothes and his hair was roughly toweled. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. It was not an order exactly, but his tone brooked no argument. Belinda sat, grateful for the warmth radiating from the hearth. Her host ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat. You need to warm up from the inside." The soup was simple but delicious, rich with vegetables and chunks of beef. Belinda had not realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate slowly at first, then more eagerly, feeling strength seep back into her limbs with each bite. The man sat across from her in another chair, watching the fire rather than her, as if to give her privacy. He had not asked her name, had not asked where she came from or where she was going, had not asked why a young woman was riding alone through a storm. The absence of questions was almost as warming as the soup. When she had finished eating, Belinda set the bowl aside and finally spoke. "Thank you. I thought I might die out there." He turned his gaze to her then, and she got her first good look at his face. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a striking pale blue, almost gray in the firelight, and there was a sadness in them that made her chest tighten. "Nobody should die in a storm if there is shelter to be had," he said simply. "Your horse is in the barn with mine. She will be fine once she is rested." "I am Belinda," she offered, though he had not asked. "Belinda Emerson." He was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether to return the courtesy. Finally, he nodded. "Briggs Bennett, this is my land." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and rain lashed against the windows. Belinda felt herself beginning to nod off, the combination of warmth, food, and exhaustion pulling her under. She jerked awake when her head drooped forward, embarrassed. "You can have the bed," Briggs said, standing. "I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Belinda protested, but she was too tired to put much force behind the words. "You can and you will," he replied, and again that tone that was not quite an order but left no room for argument. "Sleep. We can talk in the morning if you want, or not, if you do not want." Belinda was too exhausted to argue further. She stood on shaky legs and made her way back to the bedroom. The bed was soft and the quilts heavy and warm. She was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves. Belinda lay still for a moment, taking stock of herself. She was warm and dry, and while her muscles ached from days of hard riding, she felt more rested than she had in weeks. The events of the previous night came back to her in a rush. The storm, the stranger who had taken her in without question, Briggs Bennett. She rose and dressed, finger-combing her hair as best she could before venturing out of the bedroom. The main room was empty, the fire banked but still warm. Through the window she could see Briggs outside, working near the barn. Belinda spotted her own clothes hanging near the fire, nearly dry now. She folded them carefully and set them on the table, then stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The land stretched out around the ranch house in gentle swells of prairie grass, golden in the autumn light. To the west, she could see the distant shapes of bluffs rising against the horizon. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. Briggs was mending a section of fence near the corral, his movements economical and practiced. He looked up when he heard her approach. "Morning," he said. There was no warmth in his voice, but no coldness either, just a flat neutrality. "Good morning," Belinda replied. "Thank you again for your hospitality. I should be on my way soon." Briggs straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Where are you headed?" It was the first personal question he had asked her, and Belinda hesitated. "Scottsbluff, Nebraska." "I have heard there is work to be had there." "Scottsbluff is about 15 miles north of here," Briggs said, studying her with those pale eyes. "You running from something or to something?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. She considered lying, then decided against it. This man had shown her kindness when he had no reason to. "From something," she admitted. "My uncle arranged a marriage for me. I did not want it, so I left." Briggs nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense to him. "He will be looking for you, probably, but I will not be easy to find." "You plan to work in Scottsbluff. Doing what?" Belinda lifted her chin. "Whatever I can. I can cook, clean, so I can read and write and do figures. Someone will have use for me." A ghost of something that might have been respect crossed Briggs's face. "Scottsbluff is a rough town. Not many places for a woman alone." "I will manage," Belinda said firmly, though anxiety twisted in her stomach. She had thought about this, of course, during the long ride from Cheyenne. She knew the risks. But anything was better than being sold off like chattel to a man she did not know and could not love. Briggs was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "I could use help here. The ranch is small, but I run cattle and I cannot be everywhere at once. Cooking, mending, keeping the house. If you are interested." Belinda stared at him. "You are offering me work. You do not even know me." "I know you were brave enough to ride out in a storm rather than accept a life you did not want," Briggs said. "I know you are not afraid of hard work, or you would not be looking for it in Scottsbluff. And I know I need help. Why do you not have a wife?" Belinda asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question, but Briggs did not seem offended. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and that sadness she had seen the night before flickered in his eyes again. "I had one. She died 2 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days." "I am sorry," Belinda said softly and meant it. Briggs shrugged, a gesture that tried and failed to be casual. "Life moves on whether you want it to or not. The offer stands. Room and board plus $20 a month. You would have your own room, I would not. There would be no expectations beyond the work." Belinda understood what he was telling her. This would be legitimate employment, not some sordid arrangement. She studied him, this quiet, sad-eyed man who had opened his door to a stranger in a storm. There was something fundamentally decent about Briggs Bennett, she thought. Something solid. And the alternative was Scottsbluff, where she knew no one and would be vulnerable in ways she did not want to think about too closely. "All right," she said. "I will stay. For now, at least." Something in Briggs's posture relaxed fractionally. "Good. There is bread and jam inside for breakfast. After you eat, I will show you around." The ranch was indeed small, as Briggs had said, 50 acres of grazing land with a herd of about 30 cattle. A barn with 4 stalls, though only 2 were currently occupied by his horse and Belinda's mare. A chicken coop with a dozen hens. A small vegetable garden that had mostly gone to seed. A smokehouse and a root cellar. The house itself was solidly built but showed signs of neglect in the small things. Dust in the corners, dishes piled in the wash basin, mending left undone. "I have not been much good at the housekeeping," Briggs admitted, and there was something almost sheepish in his tone. "I keep up with the animals and the land, but everything else has sort of fallen apart." Belinda could see that, but she could also see the bones of a good life here. A life that had been derailed by tragedy and was now struggling to find its footing again. "I can manage it," she said. "It will not take long to set things right." She spent the rest of that first day scrubbing and organizing. Briggs worked outside, riding out to check on the cattle and repair more fencing. They moved around each other with a careful politeness, strangers sharing space and trying not to intrude. That evening, Belinda cooked a proper meal. Fried potatoes, salt pork, and biscuits. Briggs ate with the focused attention of a man who had been living on his own poor cooking for too long. "This is good," he said when he had finished. "Thank you." "You are welcome," Belinda replied. They washed the dishes together in companionable silence, and then Briggs excused himself to check on the animals one last time before bed. Belinda retreated to her room, which she had already made comfortable with her few belongings. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling and Briggs moving quietly in the main room. She thought about her uncle, who was surely furious by now, about the cattle baron she had been promised to, about this strange new life she had stumbled into. The days developed a rhythm. Belinda rose before dawn to start the fire and make coffee. Briggs was always up when she emerged, pulling on boots and preparing for the day's work. They ate breakfast together, usually in silence, though it was not an uncomfortable silence. Just two people not yet sure what to say to each other. Then Briggs would head out, and Belinda would tackle the house and the garden and the chickens. She mended his clothes, finding bullet holes and long tears that spoke of a hard life. She preserved the last of the vegetables from the garden. She scrubbed floors and aired out rooms that smelled like they had been closed up for too long. In the evenings, they would eat together and sometimes talk. Small things at first: the weather, the cattle, the price of feed in town. Gradually, as the days turned into weeks, the conversations deepened. Briggs told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with his father to find land of their own, about meeting Sarah, his wife, at a church social and knowing immediately that she was the one, about building this ranch from nothing, planning a future that had been stolen away in 3 terrible days of fever. Belinda told him about her own childhood in Chicago, about her parents dying when she was 14, about being sent to live with her uncle in Cheyenne, about the slow realization that her uncle saw her as a commodity, something to be traded for social or financial advantage, about the moment she decided she would rather risk the unknown than accept that fate. "You ever regret it?" Briggs asked one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. Leaving, Belinda considered the question seriously. "No, I was terrified, and there were moments on the road when I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But no, I do not regret choosing my own path." Briggs nodded, his eyes on the flames. "Sarah used to say that fear is just evidence that you are doing something that matters. If it does not scare you at least a little, it is probably not worth doing." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Briggs's voice was soft, distant. "She would have liked you, I think. She always had time for people who refused to bend when the world tried to break them." The words sat between them, warm and significant in ways Belinda was not quite ready to examine. She had been at the ranch for 6 weeks now, and somewhere along the way, Briggs had stopped being a stranger who had shown her kindness. He was becoming something else, someone who mattered. October gave way to November, and the weather turned cold. Briggs spent long days preparing the ranch for winter, reinforcing the barn, stockpiling feed, butchering a hog, and smoking the meat. Belinda helped where she could, and was surprised to find that she enjoyed the work. There was something deeply satisfying about preparing for the hard months ahead, about working alongside someone who treated her as a partner rather than a servant or an ornament. One evening, Briggs came in from the cold with a small package wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the table in front of Belinda, looking almost embarrassed. "For you," he said gruffly. "You have been here for 2 months now. I thought you might need it." Belinda unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a heavy wool coat, deep green and lined with flannel. It was clearly new and would have cost a significant sum. She looked up at Briggs, stunned. "You did not have to do this." "Yes, I did," Briggs said. "That thin cloak you rode in with is not going to keep you warm once the real cold sets in, and you cannot work if you are frozen." But there was something in his eyes that suggested the gift was about more than just practical concerns. Belinda stood and slipped the coat on. It fit perfectly, warm and soft. "Thank you," she said, and on impulse she reached out and squeezed his hand. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." Briggs's hand tightened around hers for just a moment, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Then he released her and stepped back, clearing his throat. "You have earned it. This place was falling apart before you came. Now it feels like a home again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Belinda felt her heart skip in her chest. When had this happened? When had Briggs Bennett become someone whose opinion mattered, whose presence she looked forward to, whose rare smiles made her feel warm all the way through? The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that turned the prairie white. Belinda stood on the porch, wrapped in her new coat, and watched Briggs bring the cattle in closer to the barn. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his land and his animals. When he finished and came stamping up to the house, shaking snow from his hat, Belinda had hot coffee waiting for him. "Thank you," he said, wrapping his hands around the cup. "It is going to be a cold winter." "We are ready for it," Belinda said, and realized as she said it that she had started thinking of this place as hers too. Of her and Briggs as a unit. "We, not you." Briggs met her eyes and something passed between them, something unspoken but profound. "Yes," he said softly, "we are." That night after supper, Briggs pulled out a wooden board and a bag of carved pieces. "Do you play checkers?" he asked. "I have not in years, but I think I remember how." They set up the board on the table and played 3 games. Belinda won the first, Briggs the second, and the third ended in a draw. They were setting up for a 4th game when Briggs suddenly spoke, his eyes on the board. "I am glad you knocked on my door that night. I did not realize how lonely I was until you showed up." Belinda's breath caught. "I am glad too," she said quietly. "I was so lost that night, scared and cold and certain I had made a terrible mistake. And then you opened the door and helped me without asking for anything in return. You gave me shelter and food and work and kindness. You gave me a place to belong when I had nowhere else to go." Briggs looked up then, and his eyes were bright with emotion. "You belong here. I do not want you to think you have to stay because you have nowhere else. You belong here because I want you here, because this place needs you. Because I need you." The confession was raw and honest, and Belinda felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I want to be here, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I choose to be, with you." Briggs's fingers intertwined with hers, and for a long moment they just sat there, hands clasped across the checkerboard. Then Briggs stood, drawing her up with him. He cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again," he said hoarsely. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, but then you showed up, soaking wet and shivering, and everything changed." "I am not trying to replace her," Belinda whispered. "I know she was important to you. I know you loved her." "I did love her," Briggs agreed. "And she will always be a part of me, but love is not a finite thing. It does not run out just because you have given it once. And what I feel for you, Belinda, it is different from what I felt for Sarah. Not better or worse, just different. Just as real, just as deep." Belinda felt a tear slip down her cheek, and Briggs caught it with his thumb. "I love you," she said, the words coming out fierce and certain. "I did not expect to. I did not plan to, but I do. I love you, Briggs Bennett." His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he held on too tight. But when Belinda wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the longing and hope and joy she felt, he deepened the kiss, pulling her close. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and Belinda felt like she had finally come home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Briggs rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am certain, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Belinda." "Yes," Belinda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit preacher who came through the area. It was a simple ceremony, attended only by a few neighboring ranchers who Briggs was friendly with. Belinda wore a blue dress that she had sewn herself from fabric Briggs had bought in town. Briggs wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Briggs kissed her with a joy that made Belinda's heart soar. The winter was long and cold, but they weathered it together. The house that had felt lonely and sad when Belinda first arrived was now warm and full of life. They talked for hours by the fire, played checkers and cards, read aloud from the books Belinda had brought with her from Cheyenne. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of shared life. Briggs taught Belinda to ride better, to shoot a rifle, to read the weather in the clouds. Belinda taught Briggs to cook more than just beans and bacon, to mend his own clothes, to laugh again. Spring came with a riot of wildflowers across the prairie. Belinda planted a larger garden and Briggs bought more cattle. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, and word got around that the Bennett place was well run and profitable. They were invited to social gatherings, to barn dances and church picnics. Belinda made friends among the other ranch wives, women who admired her competence and her obvious devotion to her husband. In June, Belinda realized she was pregnant. She told Briggs over supper one evening, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her fork. "I am with child," she said simply. "The baby will come in late winter, I think." Briggs went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then his face broke into the widest smile Belinda had ever seen from him. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Belinda asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Briggs said. He kissed her deeply, then knelt down and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I already love you more than you could possibly know." Belinda ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had taken her in on a stormy night and given her everything she had ever wanted: a home, a family, a future. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Briggs became almost comically protective, insisting that Belinda not lift anything heavy or work too hard. Belinda put up with it because she knew it came from love, though she also ignored him when she thought he was being ridiculous. In December, as the first serious snows began to fall, they prepared the house for the baby's arrival. Briggs built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving little stars along the edges. Belinda sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. The baby came on a bitter cold night in February of 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Belinda feared something had gone wrong. But the midwife from the neighboring ranch stayed calm and competent, coaching Belinda through each contraction, and finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry split the air. "A boy," the midwife announced, cleaning the infant and wrapping him in a soft blanket. "A healthy, strong boy." Belinda collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Briggs, who had been pacing the main room like a caged animal, burst through the door. His eyes were wild with worry until he saw Belinda sitting up, smiling with the baby in her arms. Then his face transformed with wonder. "Come meet your son," Belinda said softly. Briggs approached slowly, reverently, as if afraid he might break the spell. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant. "He is perfect," Briggs whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Belinda asked. Briggs was quiet for a moment, his finger gently stroking the baby's impossibly small hand. "Benjamin," he said finally. "After my father. Benjamin James Bennett." "Benjamin," Belinda repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Benjamin. Welcome to the world." The baby yawned, his little face scrunching up, and both Belinda and Briggs laughed, the sound bright and full of joy. The midwife smiled at them, these two young parents so clearly in love and so overwhelmed by the miracle they had created together. The years that followed were full and rich. Benjamin grew into a sturdy, curious child with his father's pale blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He toddled after Briggs around the ranch, learning about cattle and horses and the land. He sat on Belinda's lap while she read to him, absorbing stories and songs. In 1886, Belinda gave birth to a daughter, Grace, who was quiet and thoughtful where Benjamin was rambunctious and loud. 2 years later, another son arrived, Samuel, with a temperament somewhere between his siblings. The ranch continued to grow. Briggs's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread, and he was able to buy adjoining land, expanding their holdings. They hired help during the busy seasons, and Belinda oversaw the household with the same quiet competence she had shown from the beginning. They were respected in the community, known for their hard work and their generosity to neighbors in need. One evening in the spring of 1890, Belinda and Briggs sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Benjamin, now 6, was teaching 4-year-old Grace how to skip stones in the water trough, while 2-year-old Samuel toddled around, picking up rocks and examining them with intense concentration. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the air smelled like new grass and possibility. "You ever think about that night?" Briggs asked quietly. "The night you showed up here in the storm?" Belinda leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "All the time. I think about how scared I was, how lost I felt, and then I think about you opening that door and letting me in, no questions asked. You gave me dry clothes and hot soup and a chance at a new life. You gave me everything." Briggs wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You gave me everything, too. I was just going through the motions before you came, working the ranch because it was what I knew how to do, but not really living. You brought me back to life, Belinda. You and our children. You made me remember what it means to be happy." "I love you," Belinda said simply. "More now than even on the day we married. Every day I love you a little bit more." "I love you too," Briggs replied. "For the rest of my life and beyond, I will love you." They sat together as the sun set and the stars began to appear, their children's laughter ringing out in the gathering dusk. It had been 8 years since that stormy night in September. 8 years since Belinda had knocked on a stranger's door and been offered kindness without conditions. 8 years since both their lives had changed forever. As the years continued to pass, the Bennett family became a cornerstone of the community around Scottsbluff. Briggs was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association, where his practical wisdom and fairness earned him the respect of even the most hardened ranchers. Belinda started a small school in their parlor during the winter months, teaching not just her own children but those of neighboring families who lived too far from town to attend regular school. She was patient and encouraging, and more than one child who might have grown up illiterate learned to read and write at Belinda Bennett's kitchen table. Benjamin grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. By the time he was 16, he was doing a man's work alongside Briggs, riding out to check the herd and mending fences and breaking horses. Grace became a skilled seamstress, and had a gift for music, playing the piano that Briggs bought for the house in 1892. Samuel showed an aptitude for numbers and business, and was already talking about helping his father negotiate cattle prices and manage the ranch's finances. In 1895, Benjamin met a young woman named Clara at a barn dance in Scottsbluff. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper, intelligent and kind, with a quick wit that kept Benjamin on his toes. He courted her properly, bringing her to the ranch for Sunday dinners where she charmed both Briggs and Belinda with her genuine warmth and her obvious love for their son. They married in the spring of 1896, and Briggs built them a small house on the far side of the property. By the end of the year, Belinda and Briggs became grandparents when Clara gave birth to a baby girl they named Rose. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Belinda felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This child, this perfect little person, existed because Belinda had made the choice to run, because she had refused to accept the life her uncle had planned for her, because she had ridden through a storm and knocked on the door of a lonely rancher who had shown her kindness. "What are you thinking about?" Briggs asked, sitting beside her and looking at the baby with the same wonder he had shown when holding his own children for the first time. "About how one decision can change everything," Belinda said. "If I had not left Cheyenne, if there had been no storm that night, if I had ridden past your ranch instead of stopping, none of this would exist. Not Benjamin and Clara's marriage, not Rose, not any of it." Briggs took her free hand and squeezed it. "But you did leave. You did stop here, and all of this does exist. We exist, and I am grateful every single day for the storm that brought you to my door." As they sat together watching their granddaughter sleep, Belinda reflected on the unpredictable nature of life. She had left Cheyenne with nothing but a desperate need to escape and a vague plan to find work in Scottsbluff. She could never have imagined that she would end up here, surrounded by family on a thriving ranch, respected and loved and happy beyond measure. In 1898, Grace married a young lawyer from Scottsbluff named Thomas Eckhart. He was ambitious and intelligent, with progressive ideas about law and justice that appealed to Grace's own sense of fairness. They moved to town, where Thomas set up his practice, but they visited the ranch frequently, and Grace often brought her piano students out to practice on the better instrument Briggs and Belinda had. Samuel, meanwhile, showed no signs of wanting to marry, much to Belinda's gentle teasing. He was content to help run the ranch, and had become invaluable to Briggs in managing the business side of things. Under his guidance, the ranch expanded further, and they began breeding horses in addition to running cattle. The Bennett horses became known throughout Nebraska for their quality, and buyers came from as far away as Denver and Kansas City. The turn of the century found the Bennett ranch at the height of its prosperity. Briggs was now 54, his dark hair streaked with silver but his body still strong from a lifetime of hard work. Belinda was 45. Her beauty matured into something richer and deeper than the desperate young woman who had appeared on Briggs's doorstep 18 years earlier. They had 5 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and the ranch house that had once seemed lonely and empty was constantly full of family. One evening in the summer of 1901, Briggs and Belinda took a rare moment alone, riding out to a high point on their property where they could see for miles in every direction. The sun was setting, painting the grassland in shades of amber and gold. They dismounted and stood together, Briggs's arm around Belinda's waist, surveying the land they had built their life on. "I have been thinking," Briggs said slowly, "about what comes next. Benjamin is ready to take over the day-to-day running of the ranch. Samuel has the business well in hand. Maybe it is time for us to step back a little, enjoy what we have built without working ourselves to the bone." Belinda looked up at him, surprised. Briggs had never been one to slow down. "What would we do with ourselves? Travel, maybe," Briggs said. "You have always wanted to see San Francisco. And I would not mind visiting my cousin in St. Louis, introducing you to that side of the family. Or we could just spend more time with the grandchildren. Read more, garden more, whatever we want." Belinda leaned into him, considering the idea. It was appealing, the thought of having time that belonged only to them. They had worked so hard for so long, building the ranch and raising their family. Perhaps it was time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said finally. "As long as we are together, I do not care what we do." "Together," Briggs agreed. "That is the only thing that matters, always has been." They stood on the hill as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other in a storm and built a life that exceeded anything either of them could have imagined. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the smell of sage and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the rising moon. In the years that followed, Briggs and Belinda did indeed step back from the daily operations of the ranch, though they never fully retired. Briggs could not stay away from the horses, and Belinda could not resist helping with the spring garden. But they also traveled, taking a train to San Francisco in 1902, where they marveled at the ocean and the bustling city streets. They visited St. Louis and met Briggs's extended family, who welcomed Belinda with open arms. They took their grandchildren on camping trips into the bluffs, teaching them the same skills and stories they had taught their own children. Samuel finally married in 1903 to a schoolteacher named Alice, who shared his love of books and practical problem-solving. They built a house near Benjamin and Clara's, and the Bennett property began to feel like a small community unto itself. 3 generations living and working together on the land Briggs and Belinda had made their own. In 1905, on a warm September evening very like the one when they had first met, Briggs and Belinda held a party to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. The entire extended family was there, along with friends and neighbors from miles around. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. Musicians played fiddle and guitar, and people danced as the sun set and lanterns were lit. Benjamin stood up to make a toast. His children gathered around him. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "who showed all of us what love looks like, what commitment looks like, what building a life together really means. They started with nothing but hard work and trust in each other, and they built something that will last for generations. To Briggs and Belinda Bennett." The crowd echoed the toast, raising their glasses. Belinda felt tears on her cheeks as she looked around at all these people, this community, this family they had created. Briggs pulled her into his arms and kissed her, to the cheers and applause of their guests. Later, when most of the guests had gone home and the family was cleaning up, Belinda found herself standing on the porch looking out at the dark prairie. Briggs came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, love?" "About that storm," Belinda said. "About how terrified I was. About knocking on your door, not knowing if anyone would even answer. About you opening it and letting me in without asking who I was or what I wanted. Just dry clothes and hot soup and warmth. That was the moment my life really began, Briggs. Everything good in my life stems from that moment." "For me too," Briggs said quietly. "I was half alive before you came, going through the motions but not really living. You brought me back. You saved me just as much as I saved you that night." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional laugh. 25 years of marriage, 3 children and 8 grandchildren. A ranch that had started as 50 struggling acres and was now one of the most successful in the region. A love that had only deepened with time. "I would do it all again," Belinda said. "Every hard moment, every worry, every struggle. I would do it all again without hesitation because it led me here, to you, to this life." "Me too," Briggs agreed. "Every single moment." The years continued their steady march. The grandchildren grew and started having children of their own. Great-grandchildren toddled around the ranch house, playing in the same yard where their parents and grandparents had played. Briggs's hair turned completely white, and his steps slowed, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still keen. Belinda's face showed the lines of a life fully lived, laugh lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of joy and love. In the spring of 1912, Briggs fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and gradually worsened until he struggled to breathe. The doctor came from Scottsbluff and diagnosed pneumonia. For 2 weeks, Belinda barely left his side, sitting by his bed and reading to him, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together. The family gathered, worried and somber. But Briggs was tough, toughened by decades of hard work and clean living. He fought the illness with the same stubborn determination he brought to everything else in his life. Slowly, gradually, he recovered. By late April, he was sitting up in bed. By May, he was walking around the house. By June, he was back outside, albeit moving more slowly and tiring more easily than before. "You scared me," Belinda told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I thought I was going to lose you." "Not yet," Briggs said, squeezing her hand. "I am not ready to leave you. I want more time, more sunsets, more mornings waking up beside you, more everything." "Good," Belinda said fiercely, "because I am not ready to let you go either." They had nearly a decade more together, a decade of watching their family continue to grow and thrive. A decade of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. A decade of holding hands and sharing stories and simply being together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1915, surrounded once again by family and friends, marveling at all they had built together. Briggs passed away peacefully in his sleep on a summer night in 1921. He was 75 years old. Belinda woke to find him still beside her, his face peaceful and calm, his hand still holding hers. For a long time she just lay there, memorizing his face one last time. This man who had shown her kindness when she desperately needed it, who had loved her with steadiness and devotion for 43 years. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county. Briggs had been respected and admired, known for his fairness and his integrity. But the most moving moment came when Benjamin spoke about his father. "He taught me what it means to be a man," Benjamin said, his voice breaking. Not through grand gestures or loud pronouncements, but through small, consistent acts of love and responsibility. He showed up every day. He worked hard. He treated everyone with respect. And he loved our mother with everything he had, from the moment she appeared on his doorstep until his very last breath. That is the legacy he leaves us. That is what I hope to pass on to my own children. Belinda stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and watched as they lowered Briggs into the earth. She felt hollowed out, empty in a way she had not felt since those desperate days before she had met him. But she also felt grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared. Grateful that she had been brave enough to run from a life she did not want. Grateful for the storm that had brought her to his door. She lived for another 7 years, spending her time with her family and continuing to teach the youngest great-grandchildren to read and write. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the ranch when it was young, about building a life from nothing but hard work and love. She died in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 72, in the same bedroom where she had first changed into dry clothes on that stormy night 46 years earlier. They buried her beside Briggs under a tall cottonwood tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. The tombstone was simple, bearing both their names and dates, and underneath a single inscription that Benjamin had chosen. Together they built a life, a family, and a love that endures beyond time. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But they all knew, everyone who came after, that it had started with a storm and a knock on a door. With a cowboy who gave a desperate woman dry clothes and hot soup without asking questions. With a choice to show kindness to a stranger, and a choice to build a life together on that foundation of compassion and trust. The Bennett Ranch still stands today, over a century later, a testament to what can grow from a single moment of grace. And on stormy nights, when the wind howls and rain lashes the windows, there are those who say you can still feel the love that filled that house, echoing down through the years like a benediction. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is open your door when someone knocks, offer warmth without conditions, and trust that kindness will find its way back to you in ways you could never imagine. The story of Briggs and Belinda became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. How she arrived soaking wet and desperate. How he took her in without hesitation. How they fell in love slowly and surely, building something that lasted not just their lifetimes but echoed forward into the future. How one act of simple human decency on a storm-torn night changed the course of both their lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Their great-great-grandchildren walk the same land now, tend the same earth, look out at the same bluffs rising against the horizon. They know the story by heart, the tale of the cowboy and the runaway bride, the storm and the soup, the dry clothes and the beginning of a love story that became the foundation of everything they know. And they understand, in a way that only family can understand, that everything they have, everything they are, grew from that one moment when Briggs Bennett opened his door and let Belinda Emerson in from the storm. That is the true magic of their story. Not that it was dramatic or extraordinary, but that it was simple and human and real. Two people finding each other when they both needed finding. Two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Two people building a life from kindness and trust and steady, enduring love. That is the legacy they left behind. That is the story that will never be forgotten. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever place exists beyond this life, Briggs and Belinda are together still, watching over the land they loved and the family they created, their hands clasped together the way they were on that first night and every night after, bound by a love that proved stronger than storms, stronger than time, stronger than anything the world could throw at them. A love that started with dry clothes and hot soup and a simple act of kindness, and grew into something vast and beautiful and eternal.